Welcome back to the Berg podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And we will continue our conversation about the book right away and all at once. Got to remember the title. And we're talking about chapter 7-ish, whatever. But it's the chapter on think money in, not money out. Right? Correct. Did I get that right?
That's it.
Yeah. It's a good one. It's a good chapter. This is one where he kind of dips back into the business world. Yeah. Spends a lot of time in some of the other chapters talking about the personal aspects of work-life integration and how these things all impact you personally. And this one, he kind of dipped back into the a little bit heavier on the business side, right?
Well, it's also cool. He, because of his experience, he has a lot of anecdotal stories that kind of like help drive home the points. Like you can read the dry point anywhere, anyway, but like it's nice to have real life experiences that, of course he's going to pick the ones that fit to the story the best, but that's the point of them is they're supposed to be examples based on the things that he finds most valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, money in, money out is one of my favorite chapters in the book because it like lends itself to my responsibilities and to what we do, which realizing that the way to improve is through increasing not only how much you take in, and Brian and I talk about this, that you can increase top line revenues as much as you want, but if you don't proportionally increase the bottom line, what have you gained? But his point is sort of the only way that you're going to improve and to get better is to improve how much money comes in and how much you retain. So money into the company profitably is the way, not by trying to reduce how much money you're paying out. That's sort of so that the point of money in, money out is you'll do better by increasing how much money you take in and retain versus trying to say, we're going to buy, cheaper toilet paper and that's how we're going to save money. We're going to cut services on something and that's how we're going to save money.
Go ahead.
I like that idea, right? Because there's not usually a world you can live in where you can accomplish the goal that we're setting out to accomplish here by just slashing costs, because generally speaking, all you're really doing is sacrificing product and quality and all those things at some level. Mm-hmm. If you're only concerned about reducing the cost of the thing that you're outputting, and you can't really get there. You can't cut enough cost to still do the thing effectively, safely at a high quality. So it's gotta be increasing profitable work. So, but I like how he tries to balance that in the chapter, right? He said, like, look, when you set out on this goal, there's probably waste. There's probably some stuff in the process, the procedure, the way you're doing it now that just either doesn't make sense, doesn't need to be there. I like a phrase that coach from Johns Hopkins uses a lot. Like, it doesn't make the boat go faster. Like it's not helping the boat go race. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're just sailing. But to that end, it's not a means to the end to just continue to look for things to cut out. You got to add. Well,
and he is it in this chapter that he talks about Continental with slashing the flights? Is that in this chapter? Yeah. Right. So it is this dichotomy where there are things you can stop doing to improve your position, but that is not inherently in his mind, in his explanation. You're still increasing. It's still money in, because if you identify what you don't do well, something that you historically have always lost money. The airline is such a convenient, easy example. I think it's harder, a little bit more difficult in our business to do that, because you could identify little pieces of work or perhaps clients or a distance. Like you can see certain things where maybe historically we haven't made money, but the airline with the hub setup was a really clean, good example, saying if we fly from these 3 or 4 hubs, we're successful. Why are we flying out of these other places? Yeah. And it could be some historic reason, that they flew out of it literally because there was a CEO or somebody, that was one piece that he gives. He asked the question.
Yeah. He said, who's got a boyfriend or girlfriend there?
A boyfriend or wife or husband lives in this area that needs to fly.
Right. We don't need to go there 6 times a day. Let's just charter you a flight.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah. And that's the example. So, but in that sense, you would think that is savings, right? That's like cutting, but you're not actually cutting money out. What you're doing is reducing the cost to bring money in, because you're stopping doing something that doesn't bring any money.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like, I think like the principle he's talking about in the story you're referencing is like, stop doing things that don't make money.
Right.
Right. Like there might be things that you're doing that you're billing for that are adding to revenue. And this is kind of the conversation you and I have frequently. Like, but does it actually make you money? Is it actually helping the business, or are we just doing it because we do it? Yeah. Because we've done it. We did it. We can do it. Yeah.
I mean, Ford and I have this discussion a lot of times actually about snow, right? We continue to look at snow every year and we say like, okay, is it adding value to the company? Like in your example, is it making the boat go faster? Like initially it did, there's no question. And I think it still does, but does it? Like it's something that people just assume that every year, like, well, yeah, we're going to do exactly the same thing because that's what we do. But almost every year, Ford and I talk about this in the off season. We're like, okay, does this make sense? Does it continue to make sense? And it's a struggle because we want to do it. We want to believe it makes sense, but we try to look at the numbers and say like, does it really, And the other thing that comes to mind actually is our shop, that at times, we have done or not done things because, if you can pay $35 to $55 for an oil change, can I do the oil change for $35 or $50? If it's going to cost me $70 to do the oil change.
When's the last time you paid for your own oil change?
I do with Aaron. It usually costs like $65 to $75.
It's like $35. I mean, I don't know exactly what you're saying.
But in other words, whatever, my last one was 106, so I'm well aware that it can cost. But whatever the number is.
You drive my wife's got a little German car that we bought from you. And that thing, I don't know, must take oil that you only can get from like the rarest of places.
It only comes from a couple places.
It's got platinum dust in it.
In Germany, and it also somehow in a car the size of like slightly bigger than a nice Buick, it holds like 14 quarts of oil.
They just know how much it's going to burn.
Well, but I think real thing that is so challenging here, and the one benefit that he has and he had doing these things is he was above it and he got to look at it, because when you're in it, things don't not make sense. Great English. But because you're doing them, you're doing them. But the only way to look at it clearly is from a 10,000 foot view, because to the operations team, they just ran those flights to those places because that's what they did. So it's he is getting that, armchair quarterback type thing, because he comes in and he's asking a new set of questions because he's not tied to the same given information they are. And one thing I really did struggle with in this chapter is I was talking to the girls about it, and I've talked a fair amount of this book through to the girls, because I think it does a good job of explaining some major pieces of economics and how businesses run. And I was trying to explain this piece, and I explained the exact Continental thing. They don't fly to these hubs. And they were like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. And I was like, yeah, it does. I was like, except he fired 6,000 people. Yeah. Like, well, let's hold on. You know what I mean? Like that's the other thing about this armchair, 10,000 foot thing is when you're sitting here and you're trying to run a company and you're not letting go of, employee 457 to 467, you're letting go of Bob and Sue and Joe and Jan. Well, that's a lot harder. Like, their family. So in Ford's thing of being involved in it, it's more than just being involved in the operation. It's that when you're in a company and you grow the company and you're involved in the day-to-day operations, the people, you have a tie to those people. So like that might not be the most important flight, but you just, there could be whole groups of, families that you just may not have, dinner tomorrow night. And you can't feel guilty about it. You got to continue to do your job, but to be the company we want to be, and with the culture that we have, we try and look at each team member and say, okay, where can we best use those team? It may not work right here, or this function, this operation we're doing might not make sense, but how do we repurpose this to do it better? And that's the other piece, that he does have a convenience at the way he would come in with the venture capital companies and with the other things. He's coming in and his job was very specifically to create value. Yeah. Right. So if that was your job, and you and I talk about this, like what is our job in terms of what Ford pays us to do a certain job, and we have to do that job. Well, if the job that he paid us to do was what the author of the book, what Brenneman's job is to do, well, then you're firing 6,000 people, because it makes no sense to fly out of those places.
Yeah.
And so that I find that little bit was the rub that got me. This is the JP Morgan chapter, right? This is with Jamie.
Yeah, bought
Jamie
up
Dimon.
Bear Stearns.
Yeah, and Jamie Dimon is somebody I like to follow. I mean, he says a lot of smart things. He's got a good feel for what the market's going to do, and he put himself in a perfect position for what happened.
Yeah,
and got to, in essence, potentially save the market. But also, it was very profitable when he saved it.
Sure.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's unique too because he did do that, and maybe if he did it again in today's world, he maybe would try and repurpose that staff or relocate some of them or do something different than in the old days. There was just a little bit different of a mindset.
I think we've gone back to that mind. If you've been paying attention, I think we might have gone back to that mindset
in certain businesses. But I mean, when you're a small business and you work so hard to bring people to the team that are a culture fit, you exhaust so many options to try and make sure that you can reallocate or reuse a resource that might not have been the right spot before. Whereas when you're at that size and you're running 60,000 employees, I mean, it was like 10% type scenario. So it's really odd to read that just because of what that really means. But the Burger King idea or the Home Depot idea, I mean, there's basically, he boiled it down to 3 main elements, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all those stories, which are really cool, are all just kind of ways of getting to that particular spot. I mean, the story about the little retail store from Houston.
Francesca's.
Yeah, which, I mean, never heard of it. It's not in our market.
It's around. Yeah, it's
Is
around.
it really?
I'm aware of it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never been to one, but I'm aware. I know that.
I think my wife and daughter would be more familiar.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard of it, but that doesn't, I mean, that doesn't mean much. But, like that story of how they did certain things or, and I think part of it is, change is constant. And I think you have to be willing, they were doing something different than what, he had the background from working with J. Crew. So he thought, it takes 18 months to pick a product and sell it. And you hope
sweaters.
you hope you pick the right item that everybody wants, or otherwise you're stuck with a bunch of stuff you're going to be selling at TJ Maxx in 2 weeks.
Sure.
Whereas they were doing almost that, on demand type thing.
Yeah,
they had found a different model.
Shortened the turnaround time to 6 weeks or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And, that's just reevaluating, in our industry. We joke about this a lot, but it has some reality, is that we still have to move a pile of material from point A to point B.
Right. Yeah.
We still have to install a piece of pipe at a certain depth so that it flows the right direction. There's been minor advancements on the equipment piece, but so far nobody has reinvented the wheel yet.
Right.
But the thing I was sort of taken by in all of these, right, is there's the Burger King with the food temperature, right? The Francesca's with the delivery time, the Continental Simpler with fly where you belong, and then realize that, what was the thing? We want people to fly with briefcases, not knapsacks or something, right? That was one of their sayings. They realized that everybody was trying to go after the low budget market when there was no money in it. The truth is,
what was the one about the pizza? You make the pizza so cheap nobody wants to buy it,
yes,
which is a really funny thing.
Nobody wants to buy it.
Yeah.
So all those things. So none of them were inherently about changing the product they sold, right? They were still flying.
Sure.
Francesca's still selling clothes.
Yeah.
Burger King still selling a burger, and that was, I think, Domino's still selling a pizza. So in that sense that nothing changed with construction, that's not it. I think what the book wants us to do is look at it and say, okay, what is something we can change about the delivery of that thing or the metric that we're measuring, identify it, and then have a meaningful change. And I think the first time we read the book, we did that. We looked at some things and said, what if we did this? And we made little mild changes that had big impacts, which is the exact, the levers. It's the exact point of the book. And so as we're reading it this time, I'm trying to go through the process again and do the same legwork that we did the first time. And I'm there now. So I have it together. I'm going to share it with the operations team, with Dylan and Brad and Scott this week, and let them have a look at it. And then make some final tweaks. And then I'll give it to Ford and you to look at and see, what do we think about this as a plan going forward?
Yeah.
So I've done it, but in doing it, that's what I noticed is I need to stop looking at, I'm not trying to figure out how do we move dirt faster. I'm not trying to figure out how do we, do we change where we're working? I'm not trying to change anything material about what we do, but rather what is it that we do that doesn't make money or cost us money? And what are the things that I can improve that would change what the people that are buying that product would be willing to pay? And try and identify them, and then put those two things together as levers I could pull and say, okay, let's see if will it have a difference? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the theory. And so this chapter really speaks to me because it hits on a bunch of those stories and does that. And the crazy thing is then it turns around in the next chapter. And I don't know where you guys are, but part of me feels like we can almost go right to the next chapter because it's just the polar opposite. They just turn around and talk about your personal life and how you should handle yourself. So I don't know if we want to continue the conversation on this piece or look at that a little bit with the next phase of the next chapter, because the next chapter is the same topic, but on a personal level.
Yeah. One of the lines I really liked in the book was like, what do your customers want and will they pay for it?
Right.
Because I think that at times can be conflicting statements, right? And I think that happens a lot in the construction world. You talk to people who build houses, people who install plumbing, people who do excavation, and those things are conflicting at times. What does a customer want and assume is sort of already built in or part of the scope of their project, and what are they willing to pay for? And we're not like big fans of change orders. We've talked about that a lot, right? I mean, change order, there's some companies who are like, oh, change orders, that's where you make your money, right? Go in at no margin and then change order the job to death, and because that's where you're going to make all your margin. And that's not our MO. We would prefer a job to go exactly the way we thought it would and the customer thought it would, and be on time and on budget and a high quality deliverable product, right? And like the change orders in our mind typically become a little bit of an internal and an external struggle. So like, one, will the customer pay a reasonable and appropriate price to do that? And the second thing is, what does it cost us? Does it change
from schedule standpoint,
our schedule substantially? Does it mess with the next job? Does it mess with our crew and equipment placements? And
so it's funny you went here, and this is funny. So I had a conversation yesterday, and it's a conversation that we have struggled through on 4 different jobs in something that we do very well, right? So sinkholes. So it is very difficult to give somebody a price on a sinkhole.
Oh yeah.
Anytime I do it, they reject the price, and then they say we want to do it on either a T&M or a unit price. I'm like, okay. Because it is hard for me to calculate what our exposure is. I don't know the answer, right? I'm guessing based on what I see of a hole in the ground. So for the 3rd time in a row, I got to the end of the project, and the client was for the most part happy. We had done exactly what they asked us to do, solved the problem in a reasonable amount of time and done it. And for the 3rd time in a row, I had literally the conversation, Brian, boils down to the exact same point. It is, well, I sort of viewed this as a lump sum price when you gave it to me on that proposal. And I said, well, but the proposal calls out unit prices. It says it's this much per cubic yard, this much per square yard, this much per, I give you each of the things. And then based on what your engineer says, we use a quantity that we agreed to because you said to, and we say if it goes in excess, it will be in excess at that unit rate. And they're like, yes, we understand that. And I said, okay. And I said, and your engineer called and said, I'm going to continue working. And they said, yes. And they said, but we didn't realize that meant more money. And I'm like, well, okay, hold on. You know that it cost X per something. Mm-hmm. And then you know that your person said it was extra. And they said, well, he's not a construction manager. He's our QC QA. You should have told us. And I was like, well, I did tell you. And I actually quoted you. I was like, this is where Brian says, again, message delivered, message received. I said, I don't know why you didn't receive the message. I said, but what I'm hearing you that I now need to say is, as soon as we are going to be in excess, I need to call you and I need to see this is going to be extra, both work and money at the rate you've already agreed to. And he was like, yeah, that would be better. But what I'm really looking for is to give me all the T&M backup for everything you've done to support the price. And I said, I didn't even track it that way. Like, yes, we know how many hours the guys work. Yes, roughly I know, what exact cost code tasks they were working on, but it wasn't T&M. Like, I didn't,
right.
you know, and at the end of the day, they just don't like the price. That's what made me think of it. What happens is they are not willing to pay for what they asked us to do because it's a different price. But the real irony is when I go the other way, they are also not willing to pay for what they ask, you know? And so we had the discussion. It went virtually nowhere except that we have to like revise how we break apart some invoices. But the price didn't change at all. But in the middle of it, I was literally having the same discussion I had with Michael that time when we were together at a peer group in Charlotte. The same conversation I had with Jan from the Hampton. Like in these 3 or 4 consecutive sinkhole jobs, we have literally had the exact same discussion. And the funny part is the fourth one, the only one that didn't do it, who still dragged their feet a little bit with payment and caused us problems, has Route 202 closed. Like, have you seen that lately? The 202 is outright closed.
I didn't see that. No.
Remember the sinkhole that was down in that basin?
Yep.
And we chased the sinkhole and we concreted what they told us to concrete. And then a water main broke and there was a second sinkhole back off the road. But meanwhile, 202 has collapsed 3 times. And like you could see at times that the sinkhole was there, but nobody really wanted to address it because, I mean, it's
different owner too.
It's a different owner, right? Because it's penned up. But I'm saying it, like it's the reason they don't want to address it is because it's going to cost millions of dollars to fix it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so they don't want to pay for the thing that they know they need to do, and that's a real problem in any business. When in a worst case scenario, you've already done the work, and now you got to argue about it.
Do you feel that there's like has it changed unrealistic expectation on, you know? There used to be that 3 triangle, right? It's like, do you want it fast? Do you want it right? Or do you want it, you know, what's cheap, right? Like, and you always joked about you had to pick 2. You couldn't have 3. But it like at certain times now, they want a premium product on time at the most cost efficient price they can.
At a discount rate.
At discount
not
rate.
even the most cost efficient,
right?
At
a discount rate.
Yeah. Yep.
And, you know, the thing we keep finding, and there's no fix for this because we don't control it, but how many jobs do we go to that a client has used a different contractor on a different part of their project, and they have less than positive things to say? And at this point, you can't even hold it to the contractor because you don't know. There's always 2 sides of a story,
sure.
But it just is this constant thing where it's like, oh, I can't believe, or whatever the scenario is. And it's just like, you know, we're not going to change the client, but the client, you know, you can have, there's basically 2 types of operations you can run. You can run a budget-based operation, not budget as far as like but like the way you do like things.
The low cost option,
right?
Whatever, yeah.
Or you can kind of run a more premium version with a higher quality.
Yeah.
Most people say they want the higher quality, but they'd rather pay the more cost budget rate. And unfortunately, those 2 things cannot coexist at the same time.
Very rare, yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of like an Amazon shopping mentality. Right. And I do attribute some of it to like the way consumerism has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Like people want things to show up at their doorstep in 24 to 48 hours. They don't want to pay any more for it, and they expect it to be high quality. And they also expect that if they're unsatisfied with the quality for any reason, whether their fault, they didn't read the description, whatever it is that they thought they agreed
ordered
to,
the wrong thing,
they want to send it back and they want a full refund, you know, immediately. And and like it's funny because we have this conversation at home sometimes. I'm like, well, a part of me is just like, I don't like returning things. But the other part of me is like, well, I bought it. Like
I have some culpability here.
Like I said that was what I wanted. I said that, you know, I read the description and all of those things. That was the price I was willing to pay for what I was getting. And some of it might be on me. And now if they deliver the wrong thing, or, you know, they flat out like were deceitful or whatever it might
comes
be,
damaged.
That's a totally different argument and conversation. Right. But I think that has changed in a lot of regard, the way people consume things, whether it's, you know, consuming it from business to business or consumer to business, retail or otherwise. I think people are like you're saying, I want it fast. I expect it to be high quality. And I thought I was going to get it at
a discount.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the thing is too that, we can harp on this, but with what we do, we put a big price together for a job site.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's materials. We don't control the materials. We don't control the material pricing.
Mm-hmm.
We install it, but we're not in charge of it.
Well,
so, I mean, that's the point, like all the stormwater regulations that have come in the last 15 to 20 years or whatever it is.
Think about, so we just came out of a period of the last 4 to 5 years of like some of the highest inflation our country's ever seen on certain things. You read the inflationary numbers and they want to suggest that it's controlled and it's only gone up. But what's being measured is arguably
specific to try and cover themselves.
That have not changed as substantially as other things.
Right.
And they're not, and it's not consistent.
No.
Right? Like would you like to talk about eggs or concrete? Right? They're not at all related.
No. Right.
But both have experienced astronomical inflation.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about it along those lines, right? So we're about to experience, I think, potentially something very similar over the next 4 years. Good, bad, or indifferent, I understand where some of the federal policy and approach is going in regards to how we get certain products. And I think that likely as consumers, again, good, bad, indifferent, we're about to experience very similar things that may or may not be inflationary driven, but will be cost increases. And so as we're evaluating contracts and things of that nature, like how do we, this is like diverging a little bit from the money in versus cost. But I do think that it's got to be part of the evaluation. When we're saying we can still do those things and make money at them, where does that fall in? Like if inflationary pricing starts to dictate that we can't make money doing those things anymore, or we can do a thing, but a customer is not willing to pay the price anymore, how do we address that? How do we either diverge, change?
Well, and you covered a few things there, the two of you. The first one that Ford had said is, I think it's a really interesting exercise when you're doing a job and you say, we're going to move 100,000 yards, right? And we say, okay, that's going to cost $400,000, right? And that's a great deal. $400,000 is a lot of money. But if you said, okay, well, I'm going to move 1 yard for you, and I'm going to charge you $3.95. Right? What exactly can you get for $3.95? You know what I mean? Like, just put the diesel in the machine.
Maybe a cup of coffee.
Well, but I'm saying, put the diesel in the machine. You can't buy the machine. You can't buy the diesel. You can't buy the DEF fluid. You can't buy the coolant. You can't
get the machine there.
You can't get the machine there. You can't get the guy there. You can't get the hired. You can't cover the health insurance, right? Like, we go on and on. But nobody wants to think about the fact that we're still doing it at such a minute price. It's just such a big number when you add everything together, right? And it happens with everything. Like you look at, you're going to stabilize a site. I mean, and it might cost 3.5 to 5.5 cents a square foot, right? But you don't see that. You see, you just stabilize 60 acres and it costs you $30,000. You're like, I don't want to pay $30,000. And it's like, well, hold on. You're not paying $30,000. You're paying 4.5 cents. Do you think you could do it for cheaper than 4.5 cents? Like, I don't think you can. You know what I mean? And that's where the margins have really gotten crushed.
Yeah.
Is this behavior where they look at the total price, right? Like you get to the end of any contract negotiation. And even if we're doing what we want with this, we've been talking lately, Betsy Sterling had talked about percentage of work negotiated, right? So that's one of my focuses is to say what I call negotiated work, which does not mean that it's not public bid. It means that we have mutually agreed to negotiate to an end price that I'm okay with and you're okay with. It also doesn't mean that I give you a price of $2.4 million and you say $2 million, take it or leave it. That's not me negotiating.
That's not a negotiation.
That's not negotiation.
I guess it is, but yeah.
I mean, it is for you. It's not for me. It's an ultimatum for me.
Yeah.
But even in those perfect scenarios, they're like, I'm going to need you to cut 2%. Well, what? 2% of what? Like, I mean, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But 2%, there is no tie.
Where does it come from?
To any of the cost relevance to me, the time, the duration, production rates, all it is.
You just want me to not make money.
You just need a savings, right? Like, don't even make it personal, right? That you don't want me to make money. You've established that you want a discount off of what we negotiated, and I think it's a good price and you think it's reasonable, but you want to pay X% less. You want a discount. And that's the mentality that's become very problematic, because then what are your choices? What do you do? If you try and inflate the number to account for that, you have to deal with that. If Dan's excavation and Ford's excavation are both bidding on it, well, if Ford was already low, well, now they got Ford, And it's sort of, we have a job we're looking at right now. And my fear is they're looking at 2 bid items that are ridiculous. It doesn't matter the job. I'm not even going to talk about it, but it's bid items 15 and 16, and 23 is an alternate. Mm-hmm. But 23 is $500,000 less than 15 and 16. And they said, well, you're $1 million high on 15 and 16, but they won't talk about the price of 23. And my fear is what they want to do is get me to come down on 15 and 16 that we're not going to use anyway. And then they'll say, okay, well, obviously you were too high on 15 and 16. We're going to use 23. We'd like a similar discount on 23, which there is no discount on 23. It's already low.
It's already the low.
Because we knew it would be the option. Like it was always going to be cheaper. So we tried to drive down the price of 23 and didn't care what the price of 15 and 16 was, right? So for me, like I've become so skeptical of this behavior, this discount behavior, that I'm like, if we're going to have a discussion about 15 and 16, I first have to have a discussion that 23 is already the low price. Yeah. 23 can't move. I just want to talk about what 23 is. And they're like, let's just focus on 15 and 16, right? Like it's really become it is not a pleasant environment to operate in when people are looking for good, fast, cheap. And if you don't have all 3, you lose. Yeah. Because that good, fast, cheap equals you don't have a company, you have a charity. Right. You know what I mean? You're just going to run at 0 and hope nothing goes wrong.
Well, I wonder about that too with just projects on razor's edge is, they can build it if everything goes perfect, or they can build it if, there's been all this talk about the interest rate. Like interest rate went up 2 points, 3 points, right? Whatever it is. If that really made the difference, truly, maybe it's, not the right project or not the right.
You don't build it.
Right. Because then later, like, especially if you're building a building or doing an improvement to a property, the property value will go up at some point to reflect what you've done to that property. It's just a question of when and if that value can be, that's where they want to make the delta, right? They want to make it on that back end versus like, you know what, this raw piece of ground is only worth this. We do this work to it. It'll now be worth this. Mm-hmm. And, hey, everybody's trying. I mean, nobody wants to give away free money except for a certain group of elected people. But, there's just
public service announcement.
Yeah. There's just this whole unique, we've talked about before, the adversarial part of the construction-based business. And, I think the other part is that we've, as contractors, not helped ourselves, because there are those jobs where we do get wins. Mm-hmm. And we can't give the money back because the job was negotiated, or that it was like the deal was the deal. Right. But then the client feels like they were taken advantage of. Yeah. And they weren't, because it was agreed to. We found a better, faster way to do something, or
deliver
them exactly what they wanted.
Right. Yep.
But they felt like
I don't remember what movie it is, but there's a Adam Sandler movie where he like inherits money or something.
Big Daddy or one of those?
Is it one of those? And he somehow owns a football team or something. And like the quarterback walks in and is like, I want more money. I'm not playing. And he punches him in the face and like knocks him out, but then he helps him back up. And he says like, if you had played poorly, would you have come to me and said that I could pay you less? And he was like, no. And he was like, okay, so why should I pay you more if you played well? Right. And it's like that idea, like, when we take a job, there is risk that it will go not great or could go great within a reason that doesn't trigger any changes. Mm-hmm. And in that scenario, I feel like, a lot of time owners and GCs only see when it goes well. Anytime it goes bad, they're like, well, that was your problem.
Sorry about
that. But anytime it goes well, they're like, well, this is going really well for you. Everything's going great. Which, it doesn't happen that often, but it happens.
Unfortunately.
And then the other piece that you were talking about, or when Brian was talking about the potential inflation over the next 4 years, right? Is how do you figure out what inflates, right? Like in other words, the beauty of controlled inflation over the last 50 years is it goes up, 2 to 3%? And everything goes up 2 to 3%. It's pretty easy to account for. I mean, that isn't what happened, but mathematically, that's what they would like to say. Right? If you throw out the last 5 years, before that, things went up. And it may not have been that wages and costs went up at the same rate. Sure. But for the most part, if outside
there was some uniformity.
Right. Outside of a market impact where
Yeah.
like milk might escalate because of something happened to cows.
Yeah.
Like for the most part, things went up at a fairly predictable rate over a period of some number of years, a couple of decades. But right now, we have no idea what's going to go up. Like we know, I don't believe anything will go down.
Sure.
Right. But in other words, like fuel could be $8 a gallon or it could be $4 a gallon. And if you told me it was either, I wouldn't say that's unbelievable. Right. And you can do the same thing with concrete. And if you trigger, as soon as you trigger fuel, you trigger everything else.
Yeah.
Because you trigger trucking, you trigger machine operation.
Steel.
You right.
I mean,
you
right.
trigger everything.
Produce. Who knows? Yeah.
Right, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ironically, lately, the only thing that hasn't skyrocketed is fuel. It was high already, but it hasn't like skyrocketed because I don't know what would happen if that happened.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that there is this. We're not going to get too deep.
We're getting into money out. I don't even know which
Right,
version of the money it is, but we're not talking growth right now.
Yeah.
No.
Well, yeah.
But we are saying like, big money. We'll call it big money. The big people are doing big developments. Are kind of on hold a little bit, right? We're hearing that from a lot of our competitors. The real big jobs are having some delays, and the one thing that right now is a challenge is like we knew when the current administration was elected that there would be some uniqueness. But the problem is that there's so many things going on at the same time.
Sure.
You can't. So, I mean, if you think about two people want to build a warehouse, one builds builds a product in America, the other imports it from a country. Well, the guy that builds it in America isn't going to build the building until he knows he's protected by tariffs because that'll affect what he can charge for something. The company that imports it isn't going to build the building until they know if the tariffs are going to happen or not because it's going to change their. So both of them are basically holding because there's no consistency or like you can't read the tea leaves and see what's going to happen tomorrow till you wake up and read Twitter or whatever might happen. And so there's just so much ambiguity that there's just that like we've really found that local projects, stuff that has to happen in the local area is going to happen. It's some of this big, more speculative stuff and some of the things that have been big projects for a lot of people for the last 10, 15 years, the big, huge boxes and stuff like that. That right now is taking a little pause because of the fact that there's just a little bit of inability to foretell the future. Yeah.
And I do think that, to sort of like, as we wrap it up on topic, like I think that it is sort of a constant evaluation, right? Like
nothing stays the same.
Yeah, nothing's going to stay the same. There are only a few things in life that you can guarantee will never change. And I think that like part of what I think is the thing we all admit to missing the first time we went through the book is like this takes like sort of regular practice, whether it's in your personal life, your corporate life, whatever it might be. Like you can't set it and forget it. We're gonna have to look at it at a regular interval and say, are these still things that we do that make us money? How do we look for things that are adjacent to them to continue to capitalize on that opportunity? And how do we get rid of things that don't?
Well, and I think that is a perfect example. And I think that one thing that we've always been proud of our company for is its nimbleness and its ability to
identify market opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. And like that is as important as, there you go. Got the core value in there. Nice. But no, I think that was always been one of our calling cards, right? Is that we will, we'll find that opportunity. And so might be doing something a little different or might be a different client. Like we are willing to make those changes as necessary because that is how we got to here. And this is how we're going to go forward.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be by creating more opportunity for our team, for the company, and to do good, profitable work that is a quality product for the person we're working for. So they'll want us to do more work for them. And that's how we'll generate money in.
Yeah.
And then money out just has to be managed. You manage money out, but you make money in.
Yeah. It's a good way to put a bow on it. Well, thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you continue to come back for another episode.